Order. Rachel Hopkins to move the motion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. The significance of good youth services on our young people's development cannot be understated. They provide essential building blocks for a full and rewarding life, a safe place, acceptance, guidance, friendship, physical and mental health support, academic support and employment skills. Youth services set young people up for a healthy, happy and confident life as part of communities across Britain, acting as an indispensable component of our national infrastructure. And of course, I've seen this firsthand in my constituency of Luton South, and I want to say a huge thank you to everyone in Luton supporting our young people. You're a credit to our town and play such an important part in giving the best start in life for our young people. Yeah. Luton Council do an excellent job working with our voluntary and community sector to ensure all young people enjoy their lives and reach their full potential. And whether it's the Scouts, the Guides, Tocco Youth Centre, CYCD, Next Generation Youth Theatre, Youthscape, various cadets or sports clubs and our excellent music service, our young people have a variety of activities they can get involved in. This support and meaningful activities for young people has arguably never been needed more. With challenges such as loneliness and societal pressures stemming from the global health pandemic, the cost of living crisis, making it harder for our young people to get on. In some cases, it's ensuring a young person is guided away from being drawn into gangs or other negative activities. However, more often than not, it's about nurturing the confidence, resilience and skills of our young people. The benefits of well-resourced youth services are obvious for all to see. But rather than just reel off stats and facts, I want to use this opportunity to amplify our young people's voices. So here are some testimonies of young people as given to the YMCA about the importance of youth services. Sam, 16, said, I wasn't keen on the idea of attending a youth club at first. It was quite out of my comfort zone. But since I started attending, I've grown in confidence and have begun speaking to people more often. Attending YMCA has made a real difference in my life. Rachel, 16, told YMCA, it was around a year ago that I started to struggle with anxiety and depression, and at first I did nothing. My older sister was already attending the youth club at YMCA and invited me along. I love it here. I feel very safe and supported in the company of youth workers. They are very caring and always sit and talk with me when I feel upset or need to cry. Without YMCA, my mental health would be way worse as I would have no one to talk to and nothing to do. And Idris, also 16, said, I suffer from anxiety and anger issues. I tried to battle it alone, but it didn't work. A friend suggested I come to YMCA. I always have fun when I attend YMCA and it makes me feel really happy. It's helped me as I can take positive memories away from my time here, and when I'm feeling low, I can remember that I have Monday's Youth Club to look forward to. So there's no better testimony than that from those who actually use the services and are reaping the benefit. Unfortunately, today's debate is not just an opportunity to sing the praises of our wonderful youth services. It's also to recognise the reality of a severely underfunded, under-supported sector which has been deprioritised by the Conservatives. Of course.
Giving way, and she's given some fantastic examples there of the importance of youth services and the work of the YMCA. But would you agree with me that one of the problems in society at the moment is that children in the more deprived communities are even less likely to be able to access the services that they need for the sort of support that she's described for her constituents?
I thank my honourable friend. He makes an excellent point, and exactly why I wanted to call this debate, so that we could really press this point, particularly similar to in constituencies like mine of Luton South. After 14 years of the Conservatives cutting funding, local authorities are struggling under substantial weight of funding pressures, and youth services are often one of the first services to be cut. Councils and councillors want to deliver high-quality services for young people, but the Conservatives have given them no choice. Yep. A case in point, in my local council, Luton, it's had £170 million cut from its budget since 2010. And the Local Government Association has stated that councils in England face a funding gap of £4 billion over the next 2 years just to keep services standing still. Significant budget pressures mean there are few options available to maintain high-quality youth services. We know that children's social care is a sizable pressure on local authorities' finances, so general, more universal services for young people are compromised so that limited resources can be targeted to ensure young people most in need can be kept safe and supported. It's a difficult decision for councillors of all party colours to make, but the government are ultimately responsible due to imposing such swinging cuts on local government finances. So, of course.
Thank you, Mrs Twigg, and I thank the Honourable Member for Luton South for securing this important debate and taking my intervention. My experience as a serving Somerset councillor is that the importance of investing in youth services is obviously quite often seen as a preventative measure to address future and social and economic issues. In real terms, Somerset has seen a negative 80% change in real terms spending on youth services over the last 12 years. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that cutting these services leads to higher costs associated with addressing the problems that could have been mitigated through early intervention and support for young people? And does she agree with me that local government needs to be adequately funded?
Rachel Hopkins.
I thank the Honourable Member for making an excellent point, and I absolutely agree, and I'll be moving on to that in my speech. Thank you. It's in this context that during the Conservatives' time in office, youth organisations have fought to keep delivering great youth work amidst a 1.1 billion real terms cut in spending by local authorities on youth services. If I may at this point, just like to thank the YMCA and the National Youth Agency for their support in preparation for this debate. The YMCA's On the Ropes report found that drastic underfunding means that spending per head on youth services in England has suffered a real terms cut of 75% since 2010-2011, meaning it sits at £48 per head per 5 to 17-year-old. Even though cuts have been significant across the board, there are clear regional funding inequalities. In 2022-23, the lowest spend per young person was in the West Midlands at £24, followed by the East of England at £38 and similarly the South East at £38. Whereas in London it's £69 and Yorkshire and the Humber £71. And if I turn specifically to my constituency of Luton South, I'm also concerned about the funding cuts since the Conservatives took power. In Luton, the YMCA has found that real term spending on youth services has been cut by 73%, with spend per young person sitting at £34.60. And in the central Bedfordshire part of my constituency, spending per head for young people is £25.17, a 53% spending cut. And while passionate youth workers continue to battle to deliver high-quality support, many have had to leave the profession, as we've seen a 35% reduction in full-time equivalent youth workers employed by local authorities in England over the same period. This shouldn't have to be said, but all children, irrespective of background or geography, deserve high-quality youth services to support their development. After 14 years of the Conservatives, the reality is youth services are at breaking point, and too many young people have no access to youth services at all. Our voluntary and community sector has brilliantly stepped up to fill the gap left by the Conservative government cuts, but this isn't a long-term solution. Similarly, the physical and mental health support previously offered under youth services has been shifted onto schools and overworked, under-resourced teachers. Schools have their own pressures. According to the National Education Union's research, in Luton South alone, per pupil funding has been cut by £751 since the Conservatives took power. That's over £14 million stripped from our school system. The case for greater resources for youth services is compelling. Youth work has proven positive impacts on improving young people's mental health and well-being, behaviour, engagement with education and attainment. And youth workers achieve life-changing outcomes for young people through both intervention and prevention, building voluntary, trusted and educative relationships with the young people they support. And if it's an economic case for youth services, the Minister needs to hear, for every £1 the government invests in youth work, the benefit to the taxpayer is between £3.20 and £6.40. And youth work saves £500 million annually by preventing incidences of antisocial behaviour, knife crime and other associated criminal justice costs, according to the UK Youth and Frontier Economics. I want to preempt the Minister's response maybe too. I know he will point to the government funding directed at specific youth club buildings. And as welcome as any capital funding is, there is a pressing need for additional support for training and sustaining well-qualified youth workers. There is an absence of a coordinated strategy across government departments, leading to fragmented and insufficient funding for targeted youth services. So the YMCA has set out the following recommendations to support youth services. They say, a sustained and long-term revenue funded to bolster universal and open access youth services catering to all young people throughout the year. A cross-departmental strategy for youth services fostering a long-term vision for nationwide provision. Enforcing a duty on local authorities to ensure that all young people can access youth services in their respective areas with necessary government support and resourcing. And so I'd appreciate the Minister responding to each of those recommendations in his closing remarks. I want the impact of this debate to be that the Minister, his officials and other government departments reflect on the true value of our youth services. And I don't doubt the government recognises the good they do in our community, but I ask that additional actions be taken to ensure they receive the support they desperately need. So will the Minister outline what recent discussions he's had with colleagues in the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, Department for Education and the Department for Home Affairs about long-term resources for youth services? Will he also outline what steps the government is taking to increase the number of full-time equivalent youth workers across the UK to ensure all young people receive the support they deserve? Labour recognises the need for a long-term, coordinated approach to revitalise the delivery of youth services. And at our last party conference, we announced a 10-year programme to bring together services and communities to support young people, delivering new youth mentors and mental health hubs in every community, youth workers in pupil referral units and A&E, and a programme of public sector reform to help deliver this. Communities will come together to transform lives of children, giving them the best possible start in life. So will the Minister explain why the government hasn't implemented such a scheme during its 14 years in tenure? And as I close, I look forward to hearing the contributions of members from across the House. Together, we must continue to call for government action that ensures young people in our constituencies get the best possible start in life. And that means supporting our local youth services and youth workers.
The question is that this House has considered trends in funding levels for youth services. Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, I believe, for the first time. And I do congratulate my honourable friend and member for Luton South on securing this very important debate. It is a fact that as a direct result of cuts, more young people are being enticed into crime, and we've seen a rise in antisocial behaviour across our communities. We've heard of the new report from the YMCA, which highlights the striking challenges in the funding of youth services. And I have no doubt over the importance of them, for building young people's confidence, resilience and skills. And Tees Valley YMCA, based in Darlington, plays a vital role in providing affordable housing, engaging youth programmes and promoting overall community resilience. I pay tribute to them, other charities, churches and community groups who work with young people. Just as well they do, because public funded services have been decimated by 14 years of Tory rule. Perhaps the fact that there are no Conservative members here sitting behind the Minister to make a contribution to this debate perhaps illustrates where the Government and the Conservative Party are when it comes to youth services. The YMCA report shows that the Council's funding for youth services has been slashed by a real terms average of 73% across England over the last 12 years, with an average of just £47.79 now being spent per child. And in the North East, it's one of the lowest overall averages at just £44. I'm pleased to say, though, that in Stockton-on-Tees it sits at £101.79 per child. But, that's half of what it was in 2012. In Redcar and Cleveland, it decreased by 79%. In Hartlepool, 84%. Darlington, 89%. And in Middlesbrough, by 94%. 94%, Mr Twigg. Meanwhile, in the City of London, average spending per young person is £493.67. Young people, Mr Twigg, are our future, but the government is not investing in them, and particularly those in the northeast of England. Our young people are robbed of opportunities to learn, grow, and perhaps more importantly, to play. Between 2011 and 12 and 2022-23, the number of council youth centres in England fell by 53%, from 917 to 427. The number of council youth workers is down 35%. Funding of youth services is not mandatory, and the localised nature of provision has meant wide variation in spending on youth services across the country, and I think I've already illustrated that. As reported in the Department for Education's local authority and school expenditure for the 22-23 financial year, local authorities increased expenditure on youth services by 3% in 21-22, but that was easily swallowed up by inflation. Examining 22-23 spending levels, the figures still represent a £1.1 billion real terms reduction in local authority expenditure since 2010-11. In the North East and West Midlands, for example, real terms cuts over this time have exceeded 80%, while in Yorkshire and the Humber, East Midlands and East of England, cuts have been over two-thirds at a reduction of 68%. In 2019, there was a debate on the floor of the House on youth services. The Minister at the time, recognising similar concerns, spoke of what they were doing to improve the situation for youth workers. The Minister said, "On training for youth workers, we will renew the youth work curriculum and national occupational standards. We will also renew the entry-level qualifications into youth work, and I am pleased to announce today that we will establish a new Level 3 youth work apprenticeship." Now, we know that these are particularly valuable to frontline youth workers, paid workers and, importantly, volunteers. And we are doing this because we know the power of a trusted relationship between a young person and an appropriately trained adult. This can absolutely transform a young person's life, said the Minister of the day. So I'd ask the Minister of this day, how's all that gone? Have those things happened? Are the government's measures having the predicted impact? Sadly, I fear that there are no real positive answers to those questions that I've posed this morning. Youth services also play a vital role in tackling youth violence. In Home Office questions earlier this week, I told the House that children as young as 12 are being paid pocket money by dealers to deliver Class A and B drugs in Stockton. No one else is offering them anything, and they're in thrall to these criminals who act with impunity. Less wealthy communities see more crime and are more likely to be victims, creating disparity and inequality. With an average of 3,000 incidents of antisocial behaviour recorded every day, communities feel abandoned by authorities and increasingly unsafe. The Youth Endowment Fund's November 23 report says that many teenage children are changing their behaviour due to feeling unsafe, with 1 in 5 saying they've skipped school, and most that commit violence are not getting the support that they need. Another key finding was that children whose parents made some of the most difficult changes in response to the cost of living pressures had higher rates of victimisation. Victimisation rates were 31% above those now using food banks, 29% for those whose parents asked them to wear older clothes, 25% for those not able to go on school trips, and 23% in households where parents skipped meals or reduced portion sizes. 48% of perpetrators of violence were also victims. This increases to 64% for children receiving free school meals, 81% for children in gangs, and 87% for those who had contact with the police about a suspected offence. Importantly, only 16% of children who perpetrated violence were offered support or training to control their behaviour, meaning that 84% received no support whatsoever. And even more vulnerable children were even less likely to receive support, as 12% of them. Now, I know there is cross-party support for improving youth services and recognition over its impact, but after 14 years of the Conservatives, the country needs change. They failed on the economy, failed on public services, failed on living standards, and failed our young people. Finally, I'll just comment and say that a report from the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee on financial distress in local authorities has stressed that a fundamental review of local authority funding must take place following the next UK general election. Our young people can't wait, though. They're being exploited now. They're being criminalised now, bored into antisocial behaviour, and the government has failed them. We need that election now. We really need action for our young people.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Strigan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I just congratulate the Honourable Member for Luton South for bringing this absolutely fantastic and timely debate? And can I also endorse the comments that she has made? But in addition to what my honourable friend for Stockton North has just said, and the figures and the statistics that he provided about the challenges that we have with our youth services and also with what's happening to young people, especially from working class and poorer communities. What he described is a very similar picture to my constituency of Bolton South East, which is on the social indices deprivation 38 in the country. So, you know, I genuinely thank you for the facts and figures you've highlighted. I'm not going to repeat those, but what I wanted to say was that I agreed with everything that two of my colleagues have just said. And I know many members will touch upon this later, but we know that youth centres and places like this provide support to young places, young people as a safe places to socialise, develop and learn new skills and gain new experiences. In Bolton, we are blessed with many fantastic youth services that do amazing work, but they're all voluntary. I've seen from first-hand how these groups allow children in Bolton to go on trips that they may not normally go, as the Honourable Member for Stockton North just said, or gain access to sports facilities, music and art equipment, and experience which they would not get otherwise. We have national groups like the YMCA and the Scouts doing fantastic work in Bolton, and the YMCA has just invested £6.1 million in their new YPAD building, which is providing community space and housing for young people leaving foster care. Another group of people, young people, who we actually ignore massively and have not got full, proper provision for them when they leave foster care. They are filling gaps left by the cuts to local authorities and government budgets. We've also seen brilliant local services like the Bolton Lads and Girls Club and Be the Change in Farnworth and Raxbar in Kersley. These services are driven by local needs and run by dedicated volunteers. These organisations and their volunteers help in combating antisocial behaviour, improving young people's mental and physical health. So why then have we seen a stark reduction in their funding? Benefits for youth services are very clear, but it's quite clearly that they're undervalued and not funded properly since 2010. And as a result of the COVID, the stress and the mental health levels of young people has increased massively. They were one of the groups that suffered in some respect the most, apart from the elderly as well. We need a complete sea change in the approach to this youth services by the government. You know, young people are very easy target. And we often hear, oh, they're lazy, glued to their Xbox, social media addicts, and other expressions of such nature, when we know that's not correct. What we need is safe outdoor and indoor spaces for young people to be able to play sports, socialise, and engage with the real world. Properly, yes, of course.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for allowing my intervention. Volunteer-led Somerton Library has recently been highlighted as an excellent in a review of public libraries, and it provides, as the Honourable Member was suggesting, a crucial and important role for engaging young people. However, the national crisis in local authorities finances will threaten the future of provision of libraries such as Somerton around the country. So does she agree with me that this is a vitally important service to ensure that our local authorities are adequately funded to provide those crucial services for young people and wider communities?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I totally agree with what she has said. And it moves on to the point that we need social services and youth services which are properly funded, because they unlock the key to the potential of many, many young people, especially in communities like mine. And young are our future. When most of us are heading towards retirement, well, some are, we're heading towards the retirement ages. We need young people to be the workers who are going to be providing for us in 10, 20, 15 years' time. And it's so important, as been already mentioned, that we need to invest in them, because actually they're our future. So if we don't want to do it for a moral reason, let's do it for straightforward economic realities of the fact that we need a good young people who've been trained properly, are educated, and are able to look after themselves and contribute to our society. And I finally want to end on one particular aspect of youth services. I saw through my life as a barrister practicing in criminal law, having dealt with many young people coming through before the criminal justice system. A lot of them have had problems within their families. There's been a lot of issues that have happened to them. They've been either subject to violence themselves or abused or whatever, and they come, and quite a lot of them have got addiction problem. What we have seen over the last 10 years or so, a massive reduction in provisions for rehabilitation centres for drug and alcohol intoxication. And at the moment, to try to get a place in a drug or alcohol rehab is months and months in timing. And therefore, I would also ask the government to clearly look at that part of it, because for those young people who unfortunately end up in the criminal justice system, a lot of it is because of their addiction to alcohol and drugs, and there isn't facilities at the other end to help them to wean them off and get them off these drugs and alcohol addiction. I hope the Minister is listening to what we have to say, and I hope that we're going to get some real commitment of funding to youth services and to the issues of drug and alcohol reduction centres.
Yeah. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And congratulations to the member for Luton South for securing this debate. I don't think there's enough chance to talk about youth services in our parliamentary debates, and so I'm really glad of this opportunity, because I think youth work is so important. And I'm surprised not to see more members here, no members from the Conservative Party except for the Minister here, because it's an issue for all our constituents across the country. I'd like to pay tribute to some of the youth work that goes on in my constituency, to Regenerate, to Group 64 at the Putney Arts Centre, to Free to Be for LGBTQ+ young people, for the many church youth workers that we have, to the Amadea Youth Movement, to the Guides, Brownies and Scouts and Sea Cadets and sports clubs, and to SW15 Music, who provide affordable music lessons, and to Love to Learn, where I used to work, which provides youth work for children from an asylum-seeking refugee background, and to Wandsworth Council and all the youth workers, especially in Roehampton Base, for all the amazing work they do with our young people in increasingly difficult circumstances. And it's those difficult circumstances that I want to focus on today. In the 1990s, I was a youth worker. I worked for the Methodist Association of Youth Clubs, working with young people across the country. And I've been a passionate advocate for youth services since then, because I saw the essential work that youth workers do to enable access to skills, mental health support, support for whole of families and good relationships, a safe space to boost self-esteem, have fun, try out challenges, and skills and see a different future, potentially, than the one that you have around you, because you're meeting up with other young people and having a range of experiences. Regenerate is a fantastic youth work centre in my constituency, and they describe a stool with 3 legs. One is families, one is school, and one is informal youth work. And you need all 3 of those legs, but I feel currently that one of those legs has been cut off, and we've been hearing about the statistics from other members. According to reports by the National Youth Agency and the YMCA, youth services have been cut by an astonishing 73% since 2010. Annual spending has dropped by £1 billion. 4,500 qualified youth workers have been lost from the front line. In London, over £240 million was cut from youth services budgets between 2011 and 2021, and those cuts are continuing. Half of young people across the country don't have access to a youth service, don't know what's available in their area. And where voluntary and community groups have sought to fill this void, there is a crisis in volunteer recruitment as well, which was made worse by the pandemic, with a shortfall of at least 40,000 adult volunteers. What this amounts to is 14 long years of letting down our young people. And for me, there's no more damning indictment to 14 years of the Conservative cuts than the closed and decaying Alton Youth Club building and Roehampton Youth Club building, both in the middle of one of the most deprived estates in Wandsworth and in London, and yet sitting there where we walk past every day seeing where there used to be a youth club and it's now completely closed. And those youth workers that I've spoken to said they built up great relationships and trust of local families that can't be rebuilt very quickly at all. It's going to take a long time to rebuild our youth services. We can't talk, and the government can't talk about social mobility and talk about levelling up without also talking about supporting youth services. Not only have the government failed when it comes to investing in youth services and community spaces dedicated to youth services, but the government's approach is also really fragmented and uncoordinated. The Home Office funds some youth services aimed at reducing violent crime. The Department for Work and Pensions commissions some employment-focused youth programmes. The Department for Culture, Media and Sport funded some of the buildings of new youth centres. And there doesn't seem to be a whole streamlined strategy to look at this in the round. And then you add in all the cuts to local government, and you have a perfect storm of failure of our young people. There should be a streamlined strategy to ensure that there's a base level of universal open access youth services. Young people must be a priority. It's imperative that the government acts to prevent these missed opportunities for young people to get the support they need, and from which we all benefit from as a society. The real-world impact of both the cuts and the patchwork approach to provision of youth services is damning. The youth charity Onside found that 24% of young respondents to its recent survey reported that they do not have a safe space to go where they feel they belong. And with nowhere else to turn without the guidance, encouragement and mentoring that young people crave and that youth workers are excellent at providing, those abandoned do not go to those who do not have their best interests at heart, make bad decisions in many cases, and do not have the support they need to stop things like crime and antisocial behaviour in our communities. As the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Knife Crime has made clear in a previous report, each reduction in the number of youth centres corresponds to an increase in knife crime. Research from the University of Warwick bore this out. They found that crime participation amongst 10 to 15-year-olds increased by 10% in those London boroughs most affected by youth centre closures between 2010 and 2019. There's also a mental health cost to these cuts, a skills cost, because this also has gone hand in hand with cuts to careers advisors in schools, and a social cost of youth services closure. But it goes hand in hand with a deep-reaching economic cost as well, with youth work saving £500 million on public spending through crime reduction alone. Instead of letting down yet another generation of young people, Labour does have a plan. Young Futures will be a new cross-government national programme aimed at giving Britain's young people the best start in life. Each community will be offered a Young Futures hub, and I cannot wait to see these opened in my constituency. They will bring together mental health specialists, youth workers, neighbourhood police officers to finally give young people the start in life that they deserve, but has been missing out on for far too long. So, Chair, to conclude, there is a serious crisis in youth work caused by years of cuts and not valuing youth work, youth workers and young people. This has been stopping young people from achieving their potential. Youth work reduces crime, enables access to skills, engagement in education, good relationships and whole family support. It improves mental and physical health and, yes, happiness. Action must be taken to value and invest in youth services. And normally at the end of speeches in here, I say to the Government Minister, please can we hear your plan? But I don't believe that there is going to be a good plan. And so I can only hope for a Labour government to start changing around our youth service investment as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And may I place on record that my husband is the chair of the YMCA in Liverpool, which is a non-paid role. And I'd like to pay tribute to all the organisations and volunteers providing youth services right across my constituency of Liverpool, Wavertree and the City of Liverpool, and in particular Hart Hill Youth Club in my constituency that does incredibly innovative work. Let me begin by paying tribute to my good friend, the Honourable Member for Luton South. She spoke eloquently on the desperate need to reinvest in youth service, and I agree with her when she said it's about nurturing the confidence, skills and resilience of our young people and ensuring they get the best start in life. Chair, austerity has been a political con. We live with its consequences today. We see it everywhere in our communities and our public sector's depleted resilience, and it's our children and young adults that have bore the brunt more than most. The economic decisions taken post-2010, particularly between 2010 and 2015, have gutted the ability of the state to help people help themselves. Local authorities have become beleaguered vessels of the British state, own nothing, run nothing, commission everything, and very little at that. In the bonfire of austerity, young people and the services they relied upon were always the most expendable for the coalition government. The record of the last Labour government is a proud one on both children and young adults. The likes of Sure Start and the Connection Service were truly radical ideas that showed the value of social democratic government prioritising the needs of future generations. The Conservative Party in the late 2000s and in government droned on and on about dependency and waste across the public sector, which was rather insulting for those like me who worked in local government at the time. The rhetoric never matched the reality in respect to the well-funded services my colleagues and I worked hard to deliver. In the case of youth services, it was about career advice, housing support and assistance for those with learning disabilities and so much more beside. It was about social inclusion, removing barriers and helping young adults get in education or training for a post-industrial society where a job in the local factory was no longer guaranteed. The economic vandalism of austerity was most pronounced in our cities. I suppose it was those pesky Labour funding formulas that used to stuff all the money into the deprived areas, according to the Prime Minister, rather than the likes of Royal Tunbridge Wells. And in my own city of Liverpool, these cuts have meant that since 2010, according to the YMCA, Liverpool City Council has lost 86% of its youth service provision, which brings spending at just under £40 for each young person. In comparison, the Prime Minister's North Yorkshire constituency can spend over double, at £89 per young person. And this isn't about playing one area off against each other, but these numbers really do belie the fact that this government has no regard and no interest in equality of opportunity despite all their claims to the contrary. Young people in Liverpool and across all our cities and towns deserve better, Chair. Behind these numbers is an entire generation of young people who are blissfully unaware of what they have lost, what their predecessors were afforded. But whether it's Gen Z or the millennials, or indeed anyone under the age of 40, our people know that for 14 years they have been subject to a government who has never been surpassed in cementing intergenerational inequality. No youth clubs or youth services, violent crime up, social isolation and a lack of mental health provision, tuition fees trebled, no homes, a housing crisis, people cannot afford to buy or rent, minimum wage discrimination, no action on the gig economy, precarious work, underemployment or a low-wage economy. The age-old offer that each generation will have it better than the last is in the dustbin. And now the grim spectacle that over 136,000 of our young people are homeless with nowhere else to go. No plan to tackle the scourge of youth homelessness that the likes of Centrepoint and the New Horizon Youth Centre in North London are calling for. The cuts to youth services and youth provision have been the tip of the iceberg in a prevailing attitude that many politicians do not care about young people. The young people of the noughties have gone on to become the 30 and 40-year-olds waiting so very keenly to vote in this year's election. And they, like the people in my home city of Liverpool, have exceptionally long memories. The same will no doubt be true of Gen Z, who won't have any reference point to the likes of connections or the importance of the youth club and youth workers in their local communities. Yeah. But they're angry, and for other reasons. And quite frankly, Chair, they have every right to be. Thank you.
Wallace Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Luton South for securing this really important debate and for highlighting this key issue that all of our constituents are facing. I would also like to start by paying tribute to what the voluntary sector is doing in my area, but it is just not enough. I grew up in Birmingham, where youth services was a lifeline for many young people. These services provided lifetime friendships, a place to keep warm, a place to eat, a place to do your own work, a place to play and listen to music and just talk, a place to help you develop cooking skills, a place for you to think, read, and just have time alone if that was what you wanted to do. These places do not exist today. Young people are locked in bedrooms on their computers through no fault of their own. It is undoubtedly one of the hardest times in history to be a young person. Living through the COVID pandemic, struggling with the cost of living and unable to afford to rent or buy. That's why it is vital that we invest in youth services and support. Since the last Labour government, real-term spending on youth services, as highlighted earlier, has fallen by 73%, which equates to £1.1 billion loss. Since 2011, youth services operated by local authorities have fallen by 53%. And since 2012, there has been a 35% reduction in full-time equivalent youth workers employed by local authorities in England. At the same time, and under the same Tory government, child poverty has soared. It is shameful that 4.2 million children are now growing up in poverty in the UK, and that is 9 children in a classroom of 30 who were growing up without consistent access to warm homes, a warm dinner or a warm coat. Like many colleagues here, I have been contacted by numerous constituents about how their children are facing the cost of living crisis. My constituent contacted me as her disability means that she can't walk her children to school and the school isn't able to assist with pickups. As a single parent, all of her income goes on paying for a house that leaks, rising gas and energy bills, and a high premium on her car insurance. She constantly is cut off by the gas supplier, who takes days to switch it back on after she has spent ages on the phone to them. She is using her local food bank as she is spending all she has on trying to keep her home warm. It is a sad fact that this case isn't unique to Erdington, let alone the rest of the UK. Each of these circumstances are reasons why constituents like mine need access to better funded child services, to give her and her children the support they so desperately need. In 2021-22, and I know later figures have been highlighted earlier, the West Midlands was the region spending the least on young people's services, spending an average of £33 per every 11 to 19-year-old, compared to the region, the East Midlands, where £77 was spent. And 8 councils since 2018 have used a Section 114 notice, which notifies of severe financial distress. The Tories have wrecked our economy, plunging Britain into recession, and it's left to underfunded councils to pick up the pieces. That is why it is welcome that the government's response to their youth review provided further details on plans to level up and expand access to youth provision through a youth guarantee. However, people in my community know these promises too well. It seems everywhere the government promises to level up gets left behind, just like communities like Erdington, King's Standing and Castle Vale. Make no mistake, people in constituencies across the country will be holding the government to these pledges. It's what children in our communities deserve. Labour has a plan to break down the barriers to opportunity for young people and child poverty reduction specialists at the heart of our plans to support people from every background. There is absolutely no question about the value of youth services, which provide huge amounts of support and care for young people across the country. They don't just need to be funded properly, but also sustained long-term and accessible to everyone, regardless of their background. Our young people deserve the best, which is what they will get under a Labour government. I am confident that they would. Thank you, Mr. Twigg. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. This morning, and I very much pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Luton South, who made a really, really good speech, as did all her colleagues who followed her, and introduced this really important topic for debate. The trends in funding for youth services, they're down, and they've been down over a couple of generations. And the trends in funding for youth services are a representation of a trend in the priority, the value that society puts behind youth services. They are a Cinderella service. Local authorities of all colours, I'm afraid, will often think it's the bit of the young people's budget that you can cut the most easy. It's easier to do it than cutting, for example, school provision and other forms of formal education. And at central government level, it's not seen as significant, important enough. And yet the importance of youth work cannot be under or overstated, I should say. It is this vital third space between home and school where young people can feel safe and experience new things to expand their horizons. The trend in the reduction of provision of youth services around the country matches a trend in the increase in criminality amongst young people and the trend in increased mental health crises amongst young people. I'm not saying it's an absolute direct correlation, but there are massive, massive links and connections between the two. When we are looking at a mental health crisis, I think we are at the moment, investing in something which builds the resilience of young people so they may deal with the stuff that life throws at us when we are young and when we are not so young is of enormous value. It's hard to put a price on. I'm sure somebody has done that, but hard to put a price on the financial savings when it comes to the criminal justice system of keeping young people into areas which are profitable, which will lead them away from a life of crime and into a world where a life where they make a useful contribution to their communities. But it's also a place where people will develop role models that may not be available within the home. And it's certainly been, as I say, I think this is probably a 2 generations slow decline of youth work, largely because of a belittling of its importance. But when big financial shocks come, like 2008 and the financial crisis, it's the last thing to be saved. And there's a reason why that is, because too many people at the centre of government and local government don't value it enough. And others have alluded to this, that I chaired and helped to run a youth club in my village just before I became MP, when I was local councillor in the village of Milnthorpe. And one thing you pick up is that the kids who don't come are the ones who actually need it. And if people come from relatively well-to-do backgrounds, reasonably comfortable backgrounds, there's a decent chance, there's a much greater chance, all the stats will prove it, that you're already going to belong to some kind of youth organisation. You might do music, you might do sport, you might belong to one of the uniformed organisations. And that is a really, really, really great thing. It is fantastic to have parents who have the time and the resource to encourage you to do that, to be in social circles where that is the norm. The reality is that youth work fills the gap for so many people who do not have those opportunities. When youth work is on the decline, the people who miss out are the young people from the poorest backgrounds, always, always, always. And so the value that we can provide for younger people from more difficult backgrounds when you provide decent youth work in those communities is absolutely, absolutely enormous. What I discovered when we did put together the Milnthorpe Youth Group 20-odd years ago, a couple of things that occurred to me. One was, in a setting where there wasn't a lot of public intervention, it was in the early noughties, but still, and probably more than there was now, but certainly less than there had been previously, one of the issues we found was that we needed to be realistic in our ambition. Raising the money for a new youth centre, lots of kit, lots of staff, was something which would have held us up and taken us months, if not years, to achieve. And so we had low ambitions in order to get good outcomes quite quickly, bringing in volunteers, a team of 20 volunteers, and then tapping in to organisations that already exist. And back then, the organisation we tapped into was Crusaders, now known as Urban Saints, like a Church of England's youth wing. And they were absolutely invaluable to us. And it is a reminder that today, after a period of cutbacks over many years now, that so much provision comes through faith groups of different kinds right around the country. Partly that's out of necessity, because of the way the state has withdrawn to a large degree from this area. And partly it's because those people are motivated because of their faith to provide that provision. And I hope one of the things we may have learned from the way that during the pandemic we relied so much on faith provision in so many areas, not just in youth work, is that local authorities, health commissioners, central government should be less sniffy about youth provision and be very, very much celebrating those people who work so hard because of what they believe to provide for those in their communities, including young people. I'd say it's all the more important. I understand that people who've spoken in this debate who represent areas far more deprived than mine, right? But one of the challenges that we face in our communities is rurality and the dispersed nature of populations. It is said, isn't it, that it takes a village to raise a child. It's kind of difficult if the village has been hollowed out. It's full of second homes and there isn't that much community left to support young people. You then have that issue, of course, of the distance people may need to travel to get from where they live to where the nearest youth provision might be. So that lack of affordable housing, genuinely affordable housing, investment in social housing is a major problem in an area like ours, and I think around other parts of the country as well, as is public transport. I'll give absolute credit to the government for the £2 bus fare. fat lot of good if there's no bus to spend it on. And we need to make sure that we're investing in public transport, in new routes in communities to connect young people to the provision that is nearest to them. Indeed, I will say that the housing and the cost of living is an extra problem, an extra burden for us in Westmoreland, because if you want to try and recruit youth workers, and you've got a situation where the average house price is kind of 11 or 12 times the average salary, you're not going to attract people to come and work in places like ours. Westmoreland and Furness Council do a brilliant job offering fantastic free youth worker training, which helps to upskill the sector and bring people in. But if people can't afford to live in those communities, then they simply won't take up those jobs and do them and provide the support we desperately need. What funding there is so often, and this is mentioned to me by lots of youth providers around my constituency, voluntary and full-time, is that where funding there is so often short-term. You're going to spend all of your time, talk to the people who run Kirby Stephen Youth Club, for example, which is absolutely amazing. So much of their time is spent chasing the next round of funding, the next short-term bid, rather than being able to rely on core funding that will then be able to enable them to serve the young people in their care. And if every pot you bid for is only 3 years at most, then that is that constant worry. You might build up those relationships, as colleagues have already mentioned, and do wonderful work, and then it ends just because that pot's dried up and it's moved on to the next thing, and that's at the best. So today, I chair the steering group of the Kendal Youth Matters project, which came about 2 or 3 years ago when the police approached me, deeply concerned about young people in the town of Kendal, our largest town, who were at risk of getting into criminality, not in training, education or work, or younger than even being in the position to make those choices. What could we do to reach out to those people on that kind of understanding that very often the kids that don't go to youth provision are the ones who desperately need it the most? And so I want to just say a massive thank you to everybody who's been involved in Youth Matters in Kendal, the different organisations, businesses, charities, youth workers, in particular Bravey, the outdoor education centre based near Ambleside, who do a wonderful job in their day job, so to speak, in providing outdoor education provision for young people from the most difficult parts of the UK and giving them outstanding life-changing experiences in the heart of the Lake District. And doing that now for kids in Kendal has been an enormous blessing, an enormous advantage. What we've been able to do through Youth Matters is provide a regular base for young people in the centre of town, to bring forward existing and bespoke youth provision, ski club, climbing wall, uniform groups, things that already exist, some things which we've created specifically for this. And then the funding has mostly gone on detached youth workers to get out there and find the kids who benefit from it the most, to proactively find the young people. If you just open the doors, frankly, the middle-class kids will turn up, but you need to go out and look for those kids who would benefit from it the most. So I want to say an enormous thank you to Bravey and everybody involved in that group. And there are so many other groups as well in Kendal, Kendal Youth Zone, Lads and Lasses Club, and all the rest of the outfits that provide wonderful provision in Kendal. I mentioned Kirby Stephen. We've got things going on in the Kent Estuary as well. But there are places like Windermere, Appleby, Ambleside, lacking that provision. And it's because we're reliant so much on the voluntary sector, it depends on having the people in the right place. There is undoubtedly a mental health crisis. I would say that during my time in Parliament, the thing I have noticed the most is the spiralling of young people suffering tragic mental health crises, and the impact it has on them and their families is literally heartbreaking. And so I want us to be providing support through CAMS that we're not able to provide at the moment. The investment there is woeful. However, why are we not spending more money and more focus on investing earlier on, so you build the resilience of young people in ways which will mean that when those crises do come, they're much more able to sustain them in the same way that we put effort into stopping people smoking, getting people to do physical exercise so that we keep ourselves physically well. Why are we not investing in the things that we know will keep people mentally well throughout their lives? And that starts in youth work without a doubt. And a quick word here before I come to a conclusion, I promise. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact we've got colleagues here from the Labour Party, a minister from the Conservative Party as well, and to plea in this place, but also with your contacts, your colleagues in the Senate in Wales and in the Scottish Parliament. I'm presenting a presentation bill. to this place. And Sam Rowlands, member of the Welsh Senate, and Liz Smith, a member of the Scottish Parliament. Both of them Conservatives for what it happens, but please don't hold that against them. And the three of us are presenting private members' bills seeking to make outdoor education, residentials, a guaranteed funded opportunity for young people at primary and at secondary, so that we can connect people with the outdoors, build their resilience and do those things we know outdoor education does so well for everybody, not just those schools and those kids who can afford it. Can I just encourage members present to encourage their comrades in both other places to back those bills, and can I encourage the Minister to back mine in this place? Finally, let's also remember one of the dangers has been involved in youth work from a voluntary capacity for a couple of decades or more now. The danger always, probably second only to the lack of funding, is patronising people. That you end up with people in their 50s designing youth programmes, and so important that there's young people's co-design when we bring about new facilities for young people. Let them choose the things that they need the most. Let them be able to come up with the answers so that provision meets their needs, which is why a lot of what we're doing in the Youth Matters project, by the way, is about connecting people to training and to work, so there's real hope for the future. And the last thing is, youth work is an investment. It is always seen, like I say, as the least important thing, the thing that gets cut the first, and yet the value to our society, to those individuals, their families and our wider community is immense. Let's reprioritise youth work. It will pay us back in droves.
Opposition spokesperson Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this morning. I want to begin by congratulating my honourable friend for Luton South on securing today's debate and on her excellent speech setting out the value of youth services and the devastating funding situation they face. I also want to thank the honourable members who've all made the powerful case for youth services and paid tribute to those who provide them. Over 85% of a young person's waking hours are spent outside of school and formal education. And young people tell us they want somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. The importance of youth services and the value that they bring to young people, particularly those in disadvantaged communities, is widely acknowledged. YMCA talk about youth services as a vital resource for building young people's confidence, resilience and skills. The National Youth Agency says that youth work has proven impacts on improving young people's mental health and well-being, behaviour, engagement with education and attainment. And I know all of us have visited local youth clubs and heard from young people themselves about how youth services and youth workers have changed their lives. Honourable members have rightly highlighted the many community, voluntary and faith organisations in their constituencies working to support young people. Their work is simply invaluable in every part of the country. The Department for Culture, Media and Sport also recognises the importance of youth services. Its statutory guidance to local authorities issued last September states recreational and educational leisure time activities can have a significant effect on young people's development and well-being. Those activities can support them to build their skills, improve trust and tolerance, help them become active members of society, champion their voice. But we don't just believe youth services matter because people tell us they matter. There's a wealth of evidence demonstrating the positive impact they have. A Dutch longitudinal study highlighted the positive impact on youth work on socially vulnerable young people. Those who were recipients of youth work support for over 6 months had significantly more extensive support from their social network, participated more in society such as volunteering, developed better social skills and had higher self-esteem. Better Together, the National Youth Agency's 2023 independent review of youth work with schools found that youth workers can support schools by engaging or re-engaging young people in learning and school, reducing exclusions and persistent absenteeism and improving their wider well-being. It's well recognised that youth work can play an important role in preventing and reducing crime, including serious violence. A study by Carmen Villalera in the Economics Observatory at the University of Warwick found that closure of youth centres in London led to a 10% increase in crime amongst 10 to 15-year-olds, and young people in these areas were 12% more likely to be suspended from school. In 2020, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Knife Crime also found that a reduction in the number of youth centres corresponded to an increase in knife crime. And as my honourable friend for Luton South highlighted, 2022 research by UK Youth and Frontier Economics found that for every £1 the government invests in youth work, the benefit to the taxpayer is between £3.20 and £6.40, and that youth work saves £500 million annually by preventing incidences of knife crime, antisocial behaviour and other associated criminal justice costs. I think that's the number that the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale was hoping someone had calculated. Again, as the Department's own statutory guidance states, young people's involvement in such leisure time activities can also make an important contribution to other objectives, such as economic, social and environmental improvements, community cohesion, safer and stronger neighbourhoods, better health and increased educational attainment and employment. That is precisely why it's so important that youth services are properly resourced and that every young person has the opportunity to access them, and why today's debate is so necessary and so timely. Because, as we've heard, since 2010, local councils' expenditure on youth services, whether delivered directly or in partnership with charities and voluntary organisations, has been cut to the bone. A £1 billion real terms cut in spending by local authorities in England, who, as the House of Commons Library briefing confirms, have most of the responsibility for providing youth services, but are not obliged to fund them. It would be easy to say that youth services have been decimated, but that would be to massively underplay the scale of the reduction. As we've heard, funding hasn't been cut by a tenth, but as the National Youth Agency report, by 73%, with more than 4,500 youth work jobs lost and hundreds of youth centres closed. And as the financial crisis in local authorities intensifies, youth services face deeper cuts still. The National Youth Agency found that a third of local authorities reduced their youth provision spend between 2021-22 and 2022-23, with Worcestershire spending zero in that year. And it's reported that Kent County Council is planning to cut their entire youth offer from April. Youth work now faces historic national underinvestment. As YMCA reports, half of young people don't have access to a youth service or don't know what's available in their area. And this reduction in funding has very real consequences for young people and for society more broadly, because it is entirely short-sighted and counterproductive. The small savings that may initially be made will always be outweighed by the loss of facilities, damage to young people's social development, and far higher costs resulting from an increased need for additional interventions. As the department itself explicitly acknowledges, not securing such leisure time activities can mean young people miss out on opportunities to reach their full potential. Those activities can act as a supportive measure that can prevent costly interventions later on. This is true for all people, but is particularly important for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable young people who might need specific additional or early support. It's not like the government don't know exactly what is going on. And this savage cut to youth services has, as my honourable friend for Erdington noted, coincided with an unprecedented increase in the challenges young people face. A mental health emergency, with, according to the NHS, as many as 1 in 5 children and young people in England having a probable mental health disorder. Rising social isolation and loneliness. Serious problems with school attendance, with, according to the Office of National Statistics, 1 in 5 pupils persistently absent. A growing risk of online harms, particularly as the possibilities of AI increase exponentially. a cost of living crisis and financial worries, and as my honourable friend for Stockton North and friends from Stockton North and Bolton South East spelled out, the risk of exploitation and crime, with too many young people carrying knives and with county lines and gang conflicts affecting too many young people where they live. These challenges demand more and not less investment in youth services, but it needs to be effective investment. The Department for Culture, Media and Sport is promising to level up and expand access through its youth guarantee, but it's doubtful that this can begin to fill the gap left by more than a decade of cuts. Where the government has provided funding for youth services, this has mostly been in the form of funding for capital costs or short-term initiatives and pilot programmes. And I think the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale highlighted that extra drain there is on many voluntary organisations who have to constantly bid to produce new funding. The lack of sustainable and long-term support for universal youth work services means that providers don't have enough funding for the staffing and other resources they need to deliver youth services. In my own city of Nottingham, as in many others, we have youth centres, but they're lying empty. And as my honourable friend for Putney said, the government's approach to youth services is fragmented and uncoordinated, with the Home Office, the Department for Work and Pensions, DCMS and DLUC operating in silos. Mr Twigg, as the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree reminded us, it wasn't always this way and it doesn't have to be this way. Last October, Labour announced our plans for a national network of young futures hubs to bring local services together, deliver support for teenagers at risk of being drawn into crime or facing mental health challenges, and, where appropriate, deliver universal open access youth services. A major reform to focus on prevention rather than sticking plaster policies. Bringing together services and communities to support young people, ensure that every young person has access to the opportunities they need to thrive and get ready for work and life. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to also thank the Honourable Lady for securing this really important debate, and to all Honourable Members for their contributions, all of which were extremely passionate. And let me say right from the outset that I recognise the importance of youth services. As the Honourable Lady has just mentioned, over 85% of a young person's waking hours are spent outside of school, and it's during this time that thousands of youth workers and volunteers make tremendous difference to young people's lives. The unique nature of youth services, one that builds a long-term voluntary relationship with a trusted adult, is incredibly important. Youth services have proven positive impacts on young people's well-being, their confidence, social skills, political awareness and citizenship, and help with the development of specific skills. And I'm glad also that a number of people have mentioned the important work around loneliness. As the Minister responsible for that, I know how important it is that we look at that, particularly for young people. And in fact, just this week, in fact, it may even be today, we are launching our latest campaign targeted at helping young people who are particularly affected by loneliness, and particularly trying to look at the issue around stigma, to say that loneliness is a part of life and it's fine to admit that you're feeling lonely and to seek help. Last year, I had the privilege to visit the Lift Youth Centre in Islington, where I saw firsthand how transformational youth services can be. I spoke with youth workers who had previously attended the youth centre themselves and had been so inspired by their own youth workers that they had entered the profession themselves. I also spoke to a number of young people who definitely put me to my test when it comes to table tennis. But they told me that the youth centre gave them a safe space to meet friends, to try new activities and speak to trusted adults. And the impact of these activities, these safe spaces and trusted relationships cannot be underestimated. Ensuring all young people have access to youth services is a top priority for both myself and the Secretary of State. But before turning to the details of government funding, I think it is important to understand the wider context. There are a wide range of youth services operating in this country, funded from a wide variety of sources. For example, UK Youth estimate that there are 8,500 organisations involved in delivering youth services with a total expenditure of up to £2 billion, and I thank all of them for what they do. In addition, much of the funding delivered through our public bodies, such as Sport England, the Arts Council and the National Community Lottery Fund, benefit young people, although this is not formally counted as youth services. Of course I will.
And, you know, I'm a big fan of what the lottery have achieved in so many parts, supporting many sports clubs within my constituency. But despite the work and the outreach that those clubs do, many of the children in the most vulnerable positions never get the opportunity, nor could they afford the small subs that are in that situation. So does he agree with me that we need to look at ways of greater outreach from clubs who are benefiting from the money that we all spend occasionally on a lottery ticket?
The Honourable Gentleman makes a really important point, and I was going to come on to it later, but I will touch now. One of the important bits that we're doing within the department is our sports and physical activity strategy, and that is particularly looking at those people who are not particularly active or engaging. And we have established a task force where we're bringing together all the national governing bodies of varying sports, because they have that huge network up and down the country with all those grassroots sports organisations to see what more we can do to particularly get those that are not participating for a variety of reasons, but one of them may well be the cost element. So he's raised a really important point. As colleagues have said today, local authorities play a key part in delivering youth services, reflected in their statutory duty to provide sufficient leisure time activities and facilities in line with local needs. And we know that some areas have faced challenges in meeting this duty. In recognition of the pressures being faced, increasing local government settlement has happened with more than 64 billion this year, and an additional 500 million dedicated to ensuring the continued provision of crucial services and early intervention for communities, in particular for children and young people. And we're also committed to ensuring disadvantaged young people have holidays full of experience and opportunities. We're providing 200 million a year to local authorities and their local partners through the Holiday Activities and Food Programme. And through our reforms to social care and family help, the government is investing in new approaches that will see spending rebalanced towards more preventative measures. And I would really like to see youth services contribute to and benefit from this set of reforms. But we're also taking further steps to support local authorities to uphold their duty. As was mentioned, we recently updated the statutory guidance, which underpins the duty for local youth service provision, so that we can support local authorities to better understand what their existing duty is and how to deliver it. And we're also funding a peer review programme which provides local authorities the opportunity to learn from each other and to share best practices. By working alongside organisations in the community and voluntary organisations, local authorities can secure high-quality youth provision that meets the needs of the young people in their areas. And I know that this work is working especially well in areas that have developed local youth partnerships, which we're continuing to support. But I am keen to find solutions to some of the problems that have been highlighted today. And that is why that's why I have recently met with an organisation called the Young People's Foundations Trust, who bring all the local organisations together, and they do joint bids for grants. So it eases the burdens that the Honourable Gentleman mentioned earlier. So I want to see how we can do more work in this area and roll that out so that we can have an effective provision locally and happily give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I don't doubt his own personal commitment to youth services. But I'd gently ask him, what conversations has he had with his opposite number in the Department for Levelling up, because it's not as if local authorities don't understand the value of youth work or want to provide youth services. It's that they simply can't, because so much of their funding is now directed to those statutory services for social care, for child protection and for dealing with homelessness, that they simply don't have the money available to provide the services that we desperately need.
Well, I have regular conversations with my colleagues in the Department for Levelling Up, and that's why I was mentioning this sort of local youth partnership work, because actually the response from local authorities up and down the country to the updated guidance we gave them was very positive. And sharing of this best practice, there are some areas where this is going extremely well. The value of having this work where we will bring those people together so we can share that best practice is something that I want to see rolled out across the country. But we also have an ambitious goal, our National Youth Guarantee, that by 2025 every young person will have access to regular out-of-school activities, adventures away from home and opportunities to volunteer. And these came as a direct request from the young people themselves. We made sure that we contacted thousands of young people to ask them what their top priorities were, and they are the ones. And that's why we're investing over 500 million in services to deliver that ambition, which builds on over a 1 billion investment in England since 2015. Our funding is designed to complement the existing provisions that local authorities and dedicated voluntary and community organisations are already providing. We want to level up opportunities and ensure every young person has somewhere to go, someone to talk to and something to do, as the Honourable Lady said. And we're creating and redeveloping up to 300 youth facilities through the Youth Investment Fund, which is providing over £250 million, which has already gone out the door, supporting 226 organisations to give thousands more young people access to opportunities in their community. And we've reformed the National Citizen Service programme into a year-round offer, with 120,000 young people taking part last year and thousands more already taking part this year. And we recognise the benefits of greater join-up between formal education and the youth sector. So we are working with the Department for Education to expand access to the Duke of Edinburgh Award in schools and communities across the country. Over 400 new organisations have already started delivering the programme, giving more than 30,000 young people the opportunity to challenge themselves, support their communities and to learn new skills. And in addition, we're supporting uniform youth organisations to recruit more volunteers, as has been rightly mentioned during this debate, to sustainably increase their capacity. Over 7,500 young people already have a new place in an existing or in one of the new 250 groups that we've helped to establish. And we're supporting over 10,000 young people to take part in outdoor learning that supports their personal development through the Adventures Away from Home Fund. Now, members... yes, I can.
Towards the end of his speech. What I'm concerned about is that we have all on this side have raised the issue of the link between the youth services and crime, and I wondered if the Minister would address that before he sits down.
I certainly will. I'm coming on to that in a minute. It preempts the rest of my speech, but I'm happy to take that intervention as I'm actually going to reach it right now. Because many members have raised the issues around antisocial behaviour and crime. And there were interesting points about addiction services, and I will certainly raise that with my colleagues in both the Home Office and the Department for Health. But in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund, we are providing 22 million to youth organisations to deliver additional hours of support and positive activities for young people in areas where they may be at risk of antisocial behaviour. We've already invested 3.7 million of the Million Hours Fund, supporting over 400 youth organisations, and we'll also continue to invest in the I Will Fund to create around 60,000 opportunities for young people to make a difference in their communities through social action. But we do recognise that some young people need additional support to reach their potential, and that is why we're investing in dedicated programmes where youth workers build that trusted relationship with a young person and help steer them along the right path. We've put 2.5 million towards disadvantaged children and young people accessing green spaces. I'll happily give way.
I welcome all funding for youth services, so I welcome all these pieces of funding, but would the Minister accept that this is very piecemeal, project by project based, rather than being a place-based strategy which says, for those young people in one area, what do they have access to? And there is a need for a more joined-up national strategy for youth services.
Well, I'll come on in a moment to some further work that we're doing, but she is right, and that's why I mentioned why I'm listening to those areas where they have joined up together, so that they're all working in the same direction, rather than all trying to find different pots of money in the struggle, so that there is that local strategy. And I'm really interested to learn from those areas where this is working well and see what we can do to perhaps roll out something like that in the future. Our Summer Jobs programme, which we'll be launching this year, will also support 2,600 young people at risk of becoming involved in youth crime, alongside the UK Year of Service, which also will be providing meaningful work placements for those who are at risk of falling out of education, training or employment. And having met some of the people who have been on there, it's been so inspiring to see how their lives have completely turned around. And in addition, we've invested £60 million in the turnaround programme, which improves outcomes for more than 17,500 young people on the cusp of entering the youth justice system. But I recognise that we have to do more in working with our workforce, and I'm glad that so many people have raised that. And we are funding the National Youth Agency to maintain and improve youth work qualifications and to provide guidance on issues such as safeguardings. We work with them on the attractiveness of the career, but I recognise there are challenges that when they want to start a family, it becomes a challenging environment financially for them to stay in that career. And these are areas that I will be keen to continue to work on. And that's why we're also continuing to fund bursaries for those who would otherwise be unable to undertake youth work qualifications due to cost. And we've already awarded over 2,000 bursaries, with a further 500 expected this year. With all that said, to deliver the services that young people want and deserve, central government, local government and community and voluntary sector organisations, as well as the young people themselves, all have to work together on this. We need this collaboration to ensure high-quality experiences are accessible for young people, no matter where they live or what their circumstances. And I can assure the members here today that cross-government work does happen. In fact, just yesterday, I chaired the latest interministerial group on youth services, on youth, and I particularly wanted us to talk about giving youth voice to policy decisions and encouraging other colleagues in other departments to do what we've done. Whenever I talk about, whenever we're talking about youth provision, whatever it may be, I always ensure there are young people around the table, because this middle-aged, grey-haired man doesn't really know what they want today. So I hope I've been able to show that I'm as passionate as other members here today about increasing access to youth services and improving the outcomes for young people, because I recognise its value, I've seen it for myself and the positive impact it makes, and I conclude by saying thank you to everybody who does so much to support our young people in this country.
I thank the Minister for his closing comments there, and I don't doubt his sincerity in what he wants to achieve. However, it is notable that it was predominantly members from the other side of the House who wanted to come and raise important issues around youth services and youth workers today. And by chance, maybe more than design, we have representation from the North East, the North West, London, the Midlands, the East and the South West. So it really was an issue that needs attention up and down England. And that importance of a safe place to go, to be a young person, feel safe, and actually that it's open access, universal and targeted particularly to those who need it most in some of our most deprived areas, but importantly some of our rural areas as well as some of our urban areas. This is so important, Minister, and I really do hope that you continue to work on that cross-departmental base so that we really can see improvements in our youth services, because too many of us are seeing our young people miss out on things that can really give them that best start in life. But the importance of that youth voice, as a middle-aged woman, I will want to champion similarly those voices of our young people who are our future, as so many other people have put today. So, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, the question is that the House has considered trends in funding levels for youth services. Many of that opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. I suspend the sitting until 11 a.m.